arrays in functions, and these are as function arguments. So arrays in functions as arguments. So what I'm going to do is just write down some code, and then we'll go through how this is working. So let's say that we want to use an array in a function. So I'm going to write the prototype. So we'd have, say, so let's say we want a function that's just going to show the values in an array. So this is going to be a void function because it's not going to be changing anything or returning anything. It's just going to be displaying values that are in an array. So let's call it show array. And the way that we're going to tell the function we're sending it an array is with these square brackets. So we're going to have the type, so it's an integer, so an array of integers. And then we have the square brackets to indicate to the function that it's receiving an array. And then this int is going to be the size of the array. And I might just write the, so remember in the prototype, I'm going to actually write the function header so you can see what this is. So let's say that we have a function called num. So it's an array of integers called num. So we're going to send, so the square brackets indicate the function's receiving an array. And then we need to send the array size as well. So we're going to have an integer that's size. So this would be our function header. And then our function prototype, I'll write the prototype above it. So void show array. And then we just have int. And we don't need to include the names in the prototype, so we just have int, and then we have these brackets to indicate that the function's receiving an array, and then int, and this will be the size of the array. So this is the function prototype. Okay, so now let's look at what we would actually have. Well, actually, so before we start looking into the code of what's in the function, let's look at the function call. So let's say that we have this show. So the name of the function is show array. So to call the function, we're just going to use the name. So show array, and then let's say that we're sending it an array called numbers, and we're also sending it the array size. Whoops. So this is the function call. This looks a little bit weird because we're sending it an array, but we only give it the name of the array in the function call. So the reason why is because we don't copy the entire array into the function. Of the array is the address of the first element. So what we're sending the function is the address of the first element in our array. So I'm just going to write that down. So the entire array is not copied. Only the address of the first element is passed. So only address of first element is passed. We're not going to copy the array into the function because some arrays are huge. So that could take, if you're copying an entire array every time you call a function, that could use up a lot of memory. So we don't pass arrays we don't copy the array into the function. We send the address of the first element, and what that does is it gives the function direct access to the array. So basically it's being passed by reference. So the array name is acting like a reference variable, and we're giving the function access to the array. So the function knows the address of the first element in the array. It accesses the array through that first element, and then it can step through the array. And we're going to see how to do that. Because the array is being passed by reference, that means the function can change the array. So we're going to look at some stuff in a minute, but because the function can change the array, you need to be careful when you're using arrays and functions, because you could accidentally change an array that you're not meaning to change. So let's look at what the code would actually look like inside this function. So this function is showing the array. I'm going to just rewrite the function header. So we're just going to write the code for this array. So for this function. So int num. So we're sending this function an array of integers, the size of the array. We need to always tell the function what the size of the array is. 4, and then int, and let's just go through, so let's just step through our array. So we have int index is equal to 0, and then index less than size index plus plus, and then we just do a cout statement and display each element of the array. So this would be num index. Let's actually put some spaces between each of these. And then this is just going to be, we'll just go to the new line after it goes through that loop. Basically what's happening is so we have an array, and let's say that, so this is our function call. So we're sending an array to this function. So we're sending it the name of the array, which is the address of the first element in the array. We're sending it the array size, and then our function, so when we go to our function, it's receiving the array and the size, and it's just going to step through the array like we have been doing with when we were putting these in the main function. Because we can change the array from the function, so this function is just printing out the contents of the array, so we're not too worried about changing anything. But let's say that we wanted to make sure it didn't change anything. We can basically use a constant array parameter. So if we want to make sure that this function can't change the array, we would use a constant array parameter. So the way that would look is, so we have our void function and then show values, and we just declare our array as constant. So constant int num int size. So everything is the same, except now we put a constant in front of our array parameter, and that makes it so the function can't change the array. So if you don't want the function to change the array, this is a good thing to do. So what I want to do now is spend some time looking at some code. In this code, so the functions we want, let's just go look at this. So remember with the lottery code, we had two arrays. One was the array with the randomly generated numbers for the lottery. The other one was the array with the numbers that the user picked. And we have our arrays for those two. And then we compared, so if we go down here, we were comparing the randomly picked lottery numbers to the numbers the user picked and determining how many numbers they got correct. If they got them all right, then they were a grand prize winner. If they only got some right, it would tell them how many they got right. And I'm going to write the function prototypes, and then together we'll work on filling in the code for the function prototypes. But what we want is we want a function that's going to generate the random numbers. So we're going to have a function that generates numbers, and this is going to be the numbers for the lottery. This is going to have an array because it's going to generate the 5 numbers and store them to an array. So we're going to have int, and then it's going to have an array. And then every time we have an array in a function, we need to tell it what the size of the array is. So there's always going to be this second int that contains the array size. And that's going to be void because we're storing numbers to this array, but remember, since the name of the array is basically a reference to the array, we don't need to return anything because the function is going to change the array straight from the function. And then we want a function that's going to get the numbers from the user. So I'm just going to call this get user and then int. And this is also going to be an array because we're going to get 5 numbers from the user. So we're going to have a function that's going to compare the two arrays, and it's going to return how many matches there are. So we're going to need to send, first of all, this function is going to return a value. It's going to return the number of matches, so that's going to be an integer, and I'm just going to call this find matches. And then we're sending this function two arrays, right? We're sending it the lottery, so the randomly generated array, and we're sending it the user generated array, and we're going to compare them. So this is going to have two arrays, and they're going to be the same size, so we only need to send in one size. If you had two arrays that were different sizes, you'd have to send the size for each of them. And then we want a function that displays the values. So I'm just going to say display values, and then this is going to display the values of both of the arrays. So once again, I'm going to send it both arrays, and then the arrays are the same size, so it only needs one. It only needs one size. Okay, so let's start with this generate numbers function. Let's write the code for this. So if we go down here to the end, I'm going to call this the function definitions. And then this one we're going to need a name. So this is let's just stick with the code and call this the lottery. So this function was called lottery, and then the function, or I'm sorry, the array for that held the lottery numbers was called lottery, and then the array that held the user's number was just called user. So we'll stick with that convention. So int lottery, and then I'm just going to call this length. So now what we want to do is generate the random numbers and store them to this array. So how do you think we would do that?
Do they have the code up there already for it?
See. Yeah, it's right here. So do you think, how do you think we could move this into the function?
Couldn't you copy the whole for statement in there?
Yeah. Let's do that. So yeah, let's just copy this for loop into here. So yeah, let's look at what this is doing. So we're going through the array, the length is still the same, lottery count. This is changing the array so this function is directly changing the array in the main function because it's a reference. So I don't think we need to do anything else. I think this is it. So let's go back up here and delete this. And I'm going to specify that this is seeding the random number generator for, should I call this, for the randomly generated lottery numbers. Okay. So I think that's it for that one. What's the next one? So next one, let's actually work on the one that we display. Oh, we're sending that to arrays, so maybe we'll just do the get user one. I was going to say we could work on although we could call this array, we could call this function, and the rest of the code should still work. We're just getting the lottery numbers from this function now, right? So I was just trying to figure out a way that we could run this and make sure everything was still working correctly. That's always good to do before you make a lot of changes.
And then realize.
Yeah, because if think about it, if you spend 2 or 3 hours writing code and then you compile it, your error might be what you wrote 3 hours ago. So it's going to be a lot harder to find. So I think it's good to compile a lot, especially with a program like this where it takes a fraction of a second to compile. Okay, so to get our array, to get our lottery numbers, we're just going to use generate numbers. And then what do we need to send it?
We need to send it to array and length.
So we send it the name of the array, right?
Yep.
And then what else?
Length, right? The second part?
Yeah, length. And then I'm going to put a comment and specify what this does. So generates random numbers and stores to lottery array. So let's compile this. All right, let's enter our numbers. Oh, that's just number 1. Okay, 2. Okay, does this look like it's still working? So the first one is a match. None of the others are. So it looks like it's still working fine. So that function looks good. Now let's do the next function. The next function is to get the values from the user and store them to an array. So I'm gonna just copy and paste this header down to our function definitions, and then we can fill in the code for the function. So this is going to be int. This one is user, and then this is the length is the same again. So this is just length. And we should have comments on each of these specifying what these do. So this one generates the random lottery numbers. This one gets numbers from the user. And you might want to be even more specific on these, like with the one that generate the random lottery numbers, specify that it's generating 5 random numbers, each number is between 0 and 9. I'm not putting a ton of detail because it would take more time, but the more detail you put in these like in your comments, the better. All right, so let's get the user data. So where are we doing that? So I'm pretty sure that we could just copy and paste this loop into the function, right? So this is the loop that's stepping through the array and getting the numbers from the user. So we can just copy and paste this into our function. And then I don't think we need to do anything else. This is going to so since this is a reference variable, since the array, like the array is like the array name is the address of the first element in the array, we don't need to send anything back from the function. This function is going to directly change the array in the main function. So I think this looks good. So now all we need to do is go up here in the code, or in the main function, and replace this for loop with our function call that gets the values from the user. So that function was get user. And then this is going to be user and length. And I'm going to put a comment that this function gets the values from the user. All right, let's make sure it's still working. Let's see, I got 0 correct ones. No, that looks right. So I think it's still working. Okay, so now let's do the next one. The next one is going to find the matches in the array. So it's going to be comparing the two arrays and then returning the number of matches. So let's copy and paste this function prototype down here. So I'm going to call this this one. So this one's going to be lottery. This one is user, and this is length. Okay, so let's go look at the code that we already have and see what we can use. I think we could just copy and paste this loop directly into our function, right? We'll have to return. We'll have to make a few changes, I think, because so we need to return the number of matches to the number of matches to the main function. Yeah, so if we go down here, just copy and paste this. So we're going to have it int similar, right? And then we're going to return similar. And then if we go back up here, we can delete this. And then, yeah, replace this with the function call. We can also take this off of here, and we should probably initialize this to 0. So this is going to be find matches. So find matches, and then what do we need to send into this function call? So let's look at the function prototype. Yeah.
Which one's called first, user or lottery?
Let's go check. That's always good to check. So lottery, user, and then length.
All right, let's do that. Don't mess anything up.
All right, so lottery. Yeah, in this case, I don't know if it would matter, but there's a lot of cases where it would, so that's always good to check. Okay. So now, and we can just say similar is equal to this since this function is returning an integer. And actually, so if we do that, we still need similar here. So I shouldn't have deleted that. So similar equals 0. Int. Okay.
So you need similar both in the function at the bottom and also in the top in the main.
Yeah, because so the way we could get around not having similar in the main function is if we just had a void function that compared the values and then printed out how many matches. But in this case, I wanted to return the number of matches to the main function. So we need similar in both the main function and this find matches function. Because like if we go down and look at the find matches, we have this for loop that's going through and comparing the two arrays. And every time, so similar starts out at 0, so we're assuming initially there's 0 matches. And then we compare the two arrays, and every time we get a match, we increment similar by 1. And then this function returns the value of similar to the main function.
So it's not going to, when it goes back to the main function, It's not going to initialize it back to 0, is it?
It shouldn't because let's see, because when we get back to the main function, so in the main function, similar is initially 0, because these are two separate variables. So we have, and it might be better to call them different things because they are two different variables, like they have different memory locations. So we have this similar is equal to 0, and this similar will be equal to 0 until it gets set to whatever value this find matches function returns. Okay, so I might actually change the name in this function just so they don't seem like the same variable. So I'm going to call this one, let's just call this one matches. Oops. And then this is going to be matches. And then it's going to return the number of matches, and let's go back up here. So then similar is going in the main function will be equal to whatever that function returns. Okay, so now we have some if and else statements to determine if they're a grand prize winner or not. So if similar is equal to 5, see out, you are a grand prize winner. Else, see out, sorry, you only had, and then we tell them how many correct guesses they had. So let's see if this is still working. All right, sorry you only had one correct answer. Let's just make sure. So the first number was correct, and none of the others were. So that looks like it's still working correctly. Okay, now let's write the function that's going to output or display the values. So I'm going to do the same thing I did with the others. I'm just going to copy and paste this prototype down here, and we'll type the code for it. So this is, and I'm going to keep the same order that I had with the matches, because with the matches I sent it both the lottery and the user arrays and the length. So I'm going to send them into this function in the same order just so it doesn't get confusing. So lottery, user, and then this is length. One thing that you can do to really confuse someone trying to use your functions is randomly changing the order of things. So like with this function, we're finding the matches and we're asking for the order as lottery and then user. So if you suddenly had this function and this one's user and then lottery, that could potentially cause a lot of confusion to someone else trying to use your code. So try and keep things in the same order when you're doing things like this. Okay, so display the values. Let's go up and look at our main function and see what code we can use. So I think we can use some of this. We're going to have to write some more code to display all of the values. We'll just copy this down here. So the lottery number was, so we're displaying the lottery number. We have a for loop. And I'm going to change this so this just says lottery number. And then this is going to display the lottery number, and then it's going to display, this for loop is going to go through, display the values from this array. It's going to go to the next line. And we also want this to display the user number. So let's just do the exact same thing, only this time it's going to be user number instead of lottery number. And then we can copy and paste this for loop and then just change the name of the array. So the name of our array is user this time instead of lottery. Okay, and this code definitely needs some comments, so make sure when you're writing your own code to put in a bunch of comments saying what all of this does.
For the decrypt.
Yeah, so this is basically what you'll be doing this week, only you're going to be using that cipher code that we wrote in class.
Okay.
And I gave you the names of the functions. I gave you the function prototypes for that. So, okay, so now we need to call the function to output our values. So this is going to be display values. And then it's just going to be, we're going to send it the two arrays and the length. So lottery, user, and length. So let's see if this is still working. Oops. So 2, 3, 4, 5. All right. So lottery number, we had 0 correct answers, or 0 correct numbers. Let's run this one more time. You guys got to tell me the lottery numbers this time, see if you're luckier.
We should all give one lottery number and see what happens.
Okay.
4. 9.
3. Looks like you guys are just as unlucky as me.